The sky hung low over the plains, heavy with snow not yet fallen. Wind scraped across the land like a dull knife, worrying the edges of the sod house, until the shingles lifted and dropped again with a shudder. Inside, the fire had burned low. The woman crouched before it, coaxing flame from embers, her breath showing in pale clouds. Her hands were red and raw, the skin along her knuckles cracked. A pot of water sat on the stones, catching warmth too slowly. Behind her, in a pile of patched quilts, her youngest stirred and coughed, a sound dry and mean, like something stuck in the throat of a dying bird. She didn't turn to check on him. Not yet. She already knew what she'd see. The storm had been building since morning, the kind that crept up from the north, silent but sure, slipping its fingers under door frames, cracking the pond's skin, making the cattle restless in their bones. She had known it was coming. Still, she'd gone to fetch firewood, dragging the broken sled through crusted snow. The wind had taken her breath like a slap. She returned with barely enough to last the night. Her husband had been gone 2 winters now. Took the last horse road east with promises in his mouth, left no note. Said he'd send for them. Never did. No one in the county was surprised. She was the only one who'd believed he might come back. Now it was just her and the children. 3 left. 1 buried beneath the cottonwood before the first snow. Fever took him in a day and a half. The rest clung like saplings in a windbreak, bent but holding. She straightened from the hearth and turned to look at the boy. William, nearly 4. His cheeks were sunken, eyes too big in his face. She pressed a hand to his forehead. Cool. Too cool. She pulled the quilt tighter around him and crossed to the window. The wind howled like a wounded dog. The sky was white with it. There'd be no help tonight. She leaned her forehead against the cold glass and shut her eyes. In her chest, grief stirred slow and dangerous like thawed river ice. She let it rise. No one could see her now. No one would knock on that door. Out here in the endless stretch of white, she could weep without shame. The sob hit her like a cough, sudden and loud. She bit down on her knuckle to silence the next. They couldn't hear her cry. She didn't want them to be afraid. A log split in the fire. Sparks popped against the stones. Behind her, the girl spoke. Mama. She turned. Nora stood barefoot on the dirt floor, braids crooked from sleep. Her nightdress hung loose on thin shoulders. Get back under, she said, soft but firm. It's too cold. Mama, the girl said again. There's someone outside. She blinked. The storm whined louder. No, she said. There's nothing out there. I heard it, Nora insisted. Footsteps. A chill rolled down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. She moved to the door, grabbed the rusted shotgun from the wall and eased it open. The wind hit her like a blow. Snow whipped across the porch, erasing any sign of track or trail. But then, there, a figure, stumbling, half-bent, dark coat rimmed with frost. He came forward with a limp, dragging something behind a pack, or maybe a child, it was hard to tell. His hat was gone, hair matted to his scalp. He looked up. Their eyes met. He raised a hand and dropped it again. She didn't lower the gun. He swayed. Please, he said. Or maybe it was the wind. He fell forward into the snow. She stood frozen in the doorway, the shotgun heavy in her hands, though her heart beat faster with something more than fear. Caution, maybe. Or the instinct, buried but not dead, to not let someone die on her land, if it could be helped. Behind her, Nora whispered, Mama. She moved. Fast. Crossed the yard in 3 strides, boots sinking deep into the drift. The man was on his side, breathing, but shallow face half covered with snow already. His beard was iced through, lips pale and cracked. She crouched and grabbed him under the arms. He groaned. Not unconscious, then. Can you walk? She shouted over the wind. He gave a faint nod, but his legs buckled when she pulled. She cursed and leaned harder, dragging him with her. He wasn't heavy, lean as a deer carcass, but the snow made each step a battle. The shotgun lay forgotten on the porch. She got him over the threshold, kicking the door shut behind them. He collapsed onto the floor, coughing snow melting around him. The children stared from the far corner, wide-eyed and silent. She stepped over him, stirred the fire back to life, and took the pot off the stones. She poured some into a cracked mug, brought it to the man's lips. He tried to drink, but his hands shook too bad, so she held it for him. He took a sip, then another, then looked up at her with eyes the color of river rock. "Thank you," he rasped. She didn't answer. "Name's Elijah." She still didn't speak, just watched him. He coughed again. "I was with a wagon train, headed north. We lost the trail in the last storm. I went out looking for help." She said, "You're the only one left." He nodded. "Far as I know." She waited a long moment. Then, without a word, she stood and fetched one of the extra quilts, laid it over him, stoked the fire until it glowed again. Mama Nora whispered, tugging her sleeve. She bent close. "It's all right. But who is he?" "Don't know yet." Elijah had passed out, chest rising and falling slow. She stood over him, arms crossed, unsure what to feel. He could be lying, could be dangerous. But in this country, if someone knocked and you didn't open the door, the snow would bury them and you'd live with it all your days. She sat by the fire and closed her eyes. When she woke, the storm was still screaming. Elijah was awake, leaning on one elbow, watching the flames like he was trying to remember what warmth felt like. He looked over. "Didn't mean to scare your children." "You didn't," she said. "The storm did that." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the fire. "How long since you ate?" He hesitated. 2 days. She brought him a heel of bread and half a potato from the root cellar. He ate slow, careful. She watched the way his hands moved. Not soft, not city hands. Calloused, worked. The lines on his face looked earned, not bought. He finished and leaned back, sighing. "Reckon I owe you my life." "No one owes me anything," she said. Silence stretched long and quiet. "I didn't think anyone be out this far," he said finally. "Most wouldn't. You live here alone." She glanced toward the corner where the children had curled together asleep again. "Yes." He nodded again. Didn't pry. Outside the wind roared. Inside it was only the fire and their breathing. She added more wood, then sat back down her knees, aching from the cold. Elijah shifted under the quilt. "If the storm breaks by morning, I'll be gone." She didn't say anything. Didn't believe it either. If this felt like home, subscribe and don't leave. By dawn, the storm had softened. The wind still prowled the edges of the house, but the violence was gone. In its place came the stillness that followed blizzards, deep, thick silence, like the land was holding its breath. She rose early as always and stepped outside. Snow lay in waves, clean and heavy, burying the fences and the trail, hiding the dead grass and frozen fields. The barn door was half off its hinges, the corner of the roof caved under the weight. She made a note of it, like she did with everything else that broke or wore thin. There was no time for anger, not anymore. Only the next task. When she came back inside, Elijah was awake, sitting on the floor beside the stove. His hands were wrapped around the mug she'd left him, now refilled with hot water. He looked better color back in his cheeks, less hollow in the eyes. Still, something about him stayed guarded, like a man used to doors shutting before he reached them. "I can fix your barn," he said, nodding toward the window. "Roof's come down some." She paused. "I saw. I've done worse with less." Her jaw tightened, unsure if the offer was kindness, pride, or penance. "Maybe all three." She poured him a second mug and passed it over without a word. The day passed slow. She set the children to work sweeping, folding, peeling what was left of the turnips. Elijah bundled himself in one of her husband's old coats and went outside. She watched from the window as he trudged to the barn, disappeared through the broken door. An hour later, the rhythm of hammering started slow, sure. He'd found the toolbox without asking. By afternoon, the wind had died altogether. The sky turned a sharp, cloudless blue that always came after snow, as if daring the sun to shine again. Elijah came back inside just before dusk, tracking wet snow across the floor. He looked worn and flushed from the cold hair stuck to his forehead. Held the corner up with a beam from the woodshed, he said, "Ain't pretty, but it'll hold till spring." She gave a short nod. "That's enough." He glanced at her, something quiet behind his eyes. "You didn't ask my name. I figured if I needed it, I'd ask." He gave a soft laugh. "Fair enough." That night they shared the last of the dried beans, stretched thin with broth. He insisted the children take more. She noticed that, the way he looked at them, not like a stranger passing through, but like someone remembering something lost. After they were asleep, she sat near the fire mending socks by lantern light. Elijah sat across from her, turning a chipped mug in his hands. "I had a brother once," he said suddenly. "Younger. Sickly but smart. Loved books. When our father died, I left him behind. Thought I'd send money once I got set up. Never did. By the time I came back, he was gone." She didn't speak. Just kept stitching. "I still hear him sometimes," he said. "The way he'd read out loud. Always thought I had time." The only sound was the thread pulling through wool. Finally she said, "I buried one last month." His eyes met hers. The fire crackled between them. She set the sock aside. "I thought I had time too." It wasn't comfort, not exactly, but it was something. A flicker of understanding between two people with nothing left to prove, nothing left to offer but truth. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, the lines in his face softened. "You got a name?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time. Then, "Clara." He nodded. "Clara. That's good." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased just slightly. Outside, the snow began to melt, slow drips from the roof. Inside, the quiet no longer felt like a threat. The next morning the world had changed again. The snow still clung to the ground in long white drifts, but the light had shifted. Softer, warmer, the kind of light that made the frost sparkle like glass. It was the kind of morning that whispered something new could begin if you dared believe in that sort of thing. Clara had stopped believing long ago, and yet she lingered at the door a little longer than usual, watching Elijah as he moved across the yard. He worked with quiet focus, patching the fence that had buckled under snow. She could tell the cold still bit his fingers, but he didn't complain. Just worked. Like he meant it. Inside, William sat at the table, chewing a biscuit with slow, deliberate bites. He was still too thin, but his eyes held a touch of mischief again. Clara poured him a second cup of weak tea. He grinned up at her like she'd handed him a gift. Nora swept the floor in slow circles. She'd taken to watching Elijah too, just little glances here and there when she thought no one noticed. Once she'd asked if he was a soldier. Clara had only said no, just someone who's walked a long way. That afternoon Elijah came in holding a wooden box with a broken hinge. "Found this in the barn," he said. Was half frozen under the loft. Clara wiped her hands and took it. Inside were tools and old planes, some files a square. Her husband's. He hadn't touched them in years, but still claimed them like he might need them someday. She didn't answer, but she didn't push the box away either. Elijah set about sharpening the tools at the table. The scrape of the whetstone filled the room. William scooted closer to watch, resting his chin on the table's edge. "What's that one do?" he asked. "Chisel," Elijah said. "Cuts wood if you guide it right." "You gonna teach me?" Clara opened her mouth to stop him, then closed it again. Elijah looked up, measuring. Then he smiled. "If your mama says yes." William turned to her with wide eyes. She just nodded once, slow. Later, she stepped outside with the laundry hands stinging from the wet cloth. The air smelled of thawing earth and wood smoke. She paused, basket at her hip, and let herself look around, not for danger, but just to see. The land was still hard and wide and indifferent, but it wasn't empty. She caught movement by the well. Elijah stood with the axe splitting logs with steady rhythm. His coat hung open at the neck. Sweat streaked his brow. He paused and saw her watching. She didn't look away. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara sat by the fire with the box in her lap. The tools were cleaned and oiled, set in their places. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the lid, then looked across the room. "I was going to leave," she said. Elijah looked up from where he was wrapping a strip of leather. "Before the snow. Before you came. Where to? Didn't matter. Just away. Away from the memories. The neighbors. The silence." He waited. Didn't speak over her. "But I couldn't. I knew we wouldn't make it. And part of me," she stopped, "part of me thought maybe we weren't meant to." Elijah stood and came closer, slow. He crouched beside her, the fire painting shadows across his face. "You were meant to," he said softly. "All of you." She looked down. Her hand gripped the edge of the box. "It's not just surviving that I can do. It's the living after." Elijah reached into his coat and pulled something out. A small carved bird, smoothed by time. He set it gently in her palm. "My brother made it," he said. "Gave it to me the day I left. Said I'd need something to remind me what home felt like." Clara closed her fingers around the bird. "It was warm from his coat. I don't have much left to give," he said. She looked at him. "Really look." "You're here," she said. The fire burned low, soft and steady. The days that followed unfolded with quiet purpose. Snow melted in slow trickles from the roof, carving paths through the mud and dead grass. Clara moved through her work like always, but something inside her had shifted, like the ground softening beneath frost. Not enough to plant, not yet. But the promise was there. Elijah stayed. Never asked. Never promised. But he showed up in every way that mattered. He fixed the door on the chicken coop, repaired the stovepipe, hauled water without being told. And every day when William tugged at his coat and asked what next, Elijah made time. Taught him how to plane a board sand it smooth. Made him laugh. Made him believe in men again. Nora watched too, more careful with her trust. But Clara caught her once slipping a drawing onto Elijah's cot, a picture of their house with smoke curling from the chimney and a tall figure drawn beside it. She didn't say anything. She just let it sit there. One evening, Clara found Elijah standing in the field, staring toward the horizon as the sky darkened to copper and gray. She joined him, arms folded, the wind catching her braid. "I saw tracks today," she said. "Someone rode past the creek." He nodded. "Could be someone from town. Could be someone looking." His jaw tensed. "You worried?" She watched the sun sink behind the ridge. "I used to be. Now I don't know what to feel." He looked at her, then serious and still. "You want me to leave? I will." She shook her head. "If I was afraid of you, you'd already be gone." They stood in silence, the last light turning the snow gold. "I didn't come here to take anything," he said. "Didn't expect to stay. But this place, your children, it's something I never thought I'd see again. People building something out of nothing. Holding on when everything else says, let go." She studied him. There was no charm in his words, just truth, worn and honest. My husband left because he couldn't stand the waiting, she said. The silence between things. He needed noise, applause. And you. She looked toward the house where the children's laughter spilled faint through the shutters. I need something that lasts. He stepped closer, not touching her, not asking for anything. Just there, beside her. That night she brought out a bottle, what was left of the apple liquor her father had pressed the year before he died. They passed it between them, sitting by the fire. Tell me something real, she said, leaning back against the wall. He turned the bottle in his hands. I never believed in anything for long. Not God. Not men. Not promises. But when I got here and saw you standing in that doorway, rifle shaking but still steady, I believed in that. She didn't answer. Just reached for the bottle again. Later, when the fire had burned low and the room was dim with ember glow, he rose to go. She watched him gather his coat, roll out the blanket in the corner. Before he lay down, she said, "Stay tomorrow. We're going to the river. Sap's running early. I could use the help." His eyes met hers. "I'll be there." And he was. The river still ran slow and thick with ice, but the trees had begun to bleed. Elijah tapped the maples with a steady hand, driving the spiles just deep enough. Buckets hung low to catch the clear drip of sap. Clara worked beside him, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a strip of calico. The sun filtered through the bare branches, casting long bars of light across the snow. She hadn't been to the river since her boy died, hadn't walked this path or heard the way the ice cracked like bones beneath the current. The land held memories she hadn't wanted to disturb, but today felt different. Not easier, just possible. William ran ahead with a tin pail, boots too big for him, clumping through the slush. Nora followed slower, careful, stopping to listen to birds returning from wherever they'd gone. Elijah glanced at Clara as he checked a tree. "They're strong. They had to be. You gave them that." She didn't answer. The compliment felt too close to the truth and too far from what she believed. But she didn't push it away. They worked in rhythm, tree to tree, sap running like slow tears. Elijah hummed under his breath now and then, old songs, low and tuneless but full of something familiar. She found herself humming too, just once, just enough to remember she had a voice. They boiled the sap in the big copper kettle behind the house fire, licking the side steam rising in thick clouds. The children watched with wide eyes as it darkened and thickened, until Elijah poured the first sticky amber into a jar and held it up to the light. "Like gold," he said. "Better, maybe." Clara smiled, small but real. "Almost makes winter worth it." He looked at her. "Maybe it does." Later that night, while the children slept under heavy quilts, she sat at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug of warm sap tea. Elijah sat across from her, sleeves rolled, forearms streaked with ash. He spoke without looking up. "There's someone looking for me." Clara stilled. "I left a place I shouldn't been in. A man with power. Name doesn't matter. He's got folks who find people." "Did you hurt him?" "No," he said. "But I saw something. Spoke up about it. And men like that, when you speak, you disappear." Clara's fingers tightened on the mug. "I won't bring trouble here," he said. "If someone comes looking, I'll go." She looked at him, long and quiet. "You could run again. Or you could stop." He met her eyes. "I won't let anyone take from us again," she said. "Us." It sat between them, that word, unspoken until now, heavy with meaning, soft with promise. Elijah nodded once, a quiet vow. A week passed. Then two. Spring crept in like a whisper, slow thaws, blackbirds, soft buds on the trees. Clara caught herself singing once while hanging wash. William whittled a bird with Elijah's help, proud enough to burst. Nora planted a row of onion seeds with careful fingers. Clara noticed her hands had stopped trembling when she picked up the shotgun. Not from fear, from steadiness. One afternoon a rider appeared on the far ridge. Clara saw him first, her eyes sharper than they used to be. She didn't move, just called Elijah's name. He stepped out, looked where she pointed. The rider didn't come closer, just stood at the rise watching, then turned, rode back the way he came. Elijah exhaled. "Won't be the last." "I know," Clara said. They stood side by side. "We'll be ready," she said. And they would be. Summer came slow the way it always did in that stretch of land, first with mud, then with green. The hills softened, creeks ran clear, and the sky turned wide and forgiving. The sod house breathed easier in the warmth, the children's cheeks filled out, and the air no longer smelled of smoke and sorrow. Clara dug in the garden with her sleeves pushed up and her hat pulled low, sweat beating at her temple. Elijah built a trellis from scrap wood and old nails, running lines for the beans to climb. When he worked, he didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. His presence was a steady hum in the background of their days. He never asked to stay, never declared his intentions, but every day he stayed anyway. And Clara stopped counting the days. One morning, while kneading dough, she looked up and saw Nora sitting on Elijah's knee, watching him sharpen a draw knife. The girl leaned against him like she'd been doing it all her life, and maybe Clara thought she had been waiting for something like him to come. He noticed Clara watching and gave her a quiet nod. She nodded back, flour on her hands, heart unsteady. That night, as they sat outside, fireflies blinking in the grass and a faint breeze rustling the wheat, Elijah said, "Your land's good. You could build something more here." Clara stared into the dusk. "I was going to sell it once, just to be rid of the memories. Still thinking of it." She shook her head. "No, I'm thinking of building a new room. Let the children have the big one. I'll help." "I figured." He smiled. "Not the easy kind, but the kind that lived behind the eyes." She hesitated, then reached into her apron and pulled out something small. A ring, plain silver, scuffed from time. She held it in her palm. "My mother gave this to me when I married. I wore it long after he left. Couldn't seem to take it off. Then I did." Elijah looked at it, then at her. "I'm not offering it as a promise," she said. "Just something to hold on to if you're willing." He took it gently. She looked out over the land. "There's still things to face. People who might come. Old ghosts that haven't given up." "I've lived long with ghosts," he said. "I can face yours if you can carry mine." "I can." That night they didn't speak of love. They didn't need to. It was there in the silence. In the way he reached for her hand without asking. In the way she didn't pull away. By the end of the week they had torn down the north wall and begun the frame for a second room. William hammered crooked nails. Nora painted a sign that read home. In town, folks began to notice that Clara didn't walk with her eyes on the ground anymore. That the man who came with her bought flour and lumber and always carried something back for the children. No one said much. Not to her face. But word moved. One afternoon the sheriff rode out, sat on his horse at the edge of her land, watching the children run wild in the pasture. Elijah stood on the porch, arms crossed. Clara came out slow, calm. The sheriff tipped his hat. "I hear someone out here might be using a name that ain't his." She met his eyes. "I hear people say a lot of things." The man looked past her at Elijah. "He's got someone looking. If they come, they can speak to me." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." The sheriff nodded. All right then. He turned and rode off. No threats. Just a man who'd seen what mattered and decided it was enough. That evening Clara poured sweet tea into chipped mugs and sat beside Elijah on the porch. "You still thinking of leaving?" she asked. He took a slow sip. "Not unless you ask me to." "I won't." "Well." The fields glowed gold in the last light. The roofline of the new room caught the sun. In the distance someone laughed a child's sharp joy. Clara looked at the horizon, at the stretch of land that had taken everything from her, and then without warning given something back. "You think people like us get second chances?" she asked. He looked at her steady and sure. "I think we take them." And so they did. The days turned longer. The fields thickened with life. Green stretched in every direction, broken only by the lean shape of the barn and the steady smoke curling from their chimney. Mornings came with bird song and the creak of Elijah's boots on the porch, and Clara began to think less in days of survival and more in seasons of building. The new room took shape slow and sure, with every board nailed by hand. Clara measured twice, Elijah cut once, and the children fetched tools, swept sawdust, ran wild through the tall grass. William carved initials into the porch beam. Nora tucked dried flowers between the wallboards to keep the sadness out. Clara didn't stop her. She understood the thinking. The storm season arrived with heat that pressed against the windows. Thunder rolled through the hills like a threat, and wind tugged at the eaves. But the house held. This time it held. One night Clara sat by the fire, thumbing through the Bible her mother had given her. Not for scripture, not for comfort, just to hold something that had lasted. "I never asked," Elijah said from across the room. "What made you stay when you could have walked away from this place?" "From all of it?" Clara turned a page with care. "I wanted the land to answer me. I thought if I stayed long enough, worked it hard enough, it might say something back. And did it?" She closed the book and looked at him. "Not in words." He nodded. He understood. Some things only made sense in silence. That night the wind blew hot and strange. Clara woke to the sound of hooves, fast coming close. She rose, heart already racing. Elijah was up, 2 boots half on hand, at the door before she reached him. A rider stood in the yard, silhouetted against the moonlight. Dust clung to his coat. A city hat shaded his face. "You're Elijah Reed?" the man called out. Elijah stepped onto the porch. "Not anymore." The man tilted his head. "I was sent to find you. Didn't expect to find you with a house, a woman, and children at your feet. You can ride back and say you didn't." Clara stood behind him, quiet. The man looked at her, then at the house, then at the carved initials in the post. "Things change," he said at last, "even out here." He turned his horse, rode off without another word. Elijah stayed on the porch long after he was gone. Clara came beside him, wrapped her shawl tighter. "I thought you'd run," she said. "I used to," he said, "but not from this." The next day he began carving a cradle from pine. Said it was just to have, just in case. Said nothing else. Clara didn't press, but she cooked more than usual, and folded old quilts she hadn't touched in years. The summer passed, then autumn. They built a smokehouse, fenced in more land. Elijah carved wooden toys. Clara taught Nora to make bread without looking at the recipe. William learned to fish, proud and loud about it. And one crisp evening, after the sun dipped low and the fields were gold with stubble, Clara pressed Elijah's hand to her belly. Just once. He said nothing, just bent his head and rested it there, listening. When winter came again, it did not come cruel. And in the drawer beside her bed, Clara placed the old ring, not as a memory, but as something waiting. The storm had passed, not gone forever, but passed. They had survived, and now at last they were living. If you're still listening, subscribe and keep going.